What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another ProGuides Wild Rift video. I'm your host Kangas, and today I'm going over counter picks for some of the strongest meta champions. These meta picks have been taking over the Wild Rift, and they need to be stopped. The counter picks provided will do exactly that. But before we begin, our question of the day. If you were stuck with a single champion role for the rest of your life, which would it be and why? I think I'd either choose a tank or artillery mage, but let me know yours in the comments below. Now let's get into the video. First up, we're discussing the tanky engaged support, Leona. She's been an absolute monster in the support role thanks to her fantastic gap closing potential and insane CC. Zenith Blade, Leona's third ability, shoots out a long-range sword that flings her onto the enemy, snaring them and allowing her to combo with the rest of her crowd control. If you're hit by this skill, expect to be locked down pretty much until your death. She excels in the early stages of the game, snowballing a lead in lane and roaming the map to spread the advantage to the rest of her team. Leona is truly the shining support carry, capable of dazzling players with her oppressive crowd control and engage potential. But to counter Leona, you simply need to prevent her from initially closing that gap. After all, what good is her auto attack stun if she can't get in range to auto attack? So naturally, the best champion to do so is Janna, the Storm's Fury. She is an enchanter support that plays to protect allied champions, utilizing her own crowd control abilities and shields to keep them alive. Thanks to her first ability, Howling Gale, she's able to directly counter Leona's Zenith Blade. Howling Gale shoots out a tornado that knocks up all enemy units in a straight line, interrupting their dashes and thereby their engages. Simply throw out the tornado right as Leona throws out her Zenith Blade, which will knock her up and prevent her from closing in the gap, and therefore from executing the rest of her combo. This should be rather simple to perform with a rather generous time frame. And once Leona's initial engage is countered, Janna can easily punish the melee tanky support by safely cutting her down with auto attacks and her second skill, Zephyr. Chunking Leona's health effectively decreases Leona's future engage success rate, since a low health engage often results in Leona's death rather than a favorable play. But keep in mind, if you miss Howling Gale and Leona does manage to engage, Janna and her AD carry will be sitting ducks. Janna's kit relies on denying the enemy's plays rather than recovering from them after. So be wary of this fact and make sure that you're spacing properly from Leona. Denying Leona in the early stages of the game is imperative to countering her. The longer she can be kept irrelevant, the more map control you gain. So be sure to poke Leona down whenever possible, abusing Janna's long range, auto attacks, and skills. And if for some reason you didn't know that Leona was meta, we're going to be covering a lot of the meta champs and how to counter them in this video, obviously, but you can also check out what meta champions exist on patch 2.2 in our other video here. We do tier lists for high elo as well as lower to mid elo, so whatever elo you're in, you should find some value there. And for those of you just looking for more people to talk about Wild Rift with, join our community Discord through the link in the description. We got a lot of cool folks in there, and you can even say hi to me and Nate if you want to. Alright, next up for AD carries, Kaisa is on the list. She's been incredibly strong for a while. She scales into a mid to late game carry thanks to her synergy with Runan's Hurricane and her ability to follow up on key crowd control skills during teamfights. Since Kaisa is strongest when she acquires her core items, you need to punish her early on. During the laning phase, she relies on walking up to her target to proc her first ability, Acathian Rain. This throws out a missile barrage, dealing fantastic burst damage when targeting a single champion. But the key aspect to countering this skill, and Kaisa in general, is the relatively short range. Miss Fortune is the best lane bully in Wild Rift capable of abusing Kaisa's short range in lane. The objective of this pick is to poke down Kaisa by hitting double ups through minions, pushing her away from the wave. When properly angled, double up is nearly undodgeable. Abuse this skill over and over until Kaisa is forced to play very passively. If Kaisa attempts to walk up to auto attack or use Acathian Rain, throw out Miss Fortune's third ability, Make It Rain. This will slow Kaisa and punish her for walking up. Sprinkle in some auto attacks to deal some extra damage, and walk it off with Strut, Miss Fortune's second ability. This grants her bonus movement speed and attack speed, so it helps you trade and get away. Each of Miss Fortune's skills allow her to far outperform Kaisa during the laning phase, with enough mobility and poke damage to maneuver around Kaisa's short and abusable range. Kaisa will inevitably grow into a teamfighting monster in the later stages of the game though. Continue to make the game as unplayable as possible by poking her down with Miss Fortune, preventing her from farming and reaching her core item power spikes. While she's still weak, try to acquire as much map priority and destroy as many objectives as possible. This means you're going to try and impact the game in the early phase in a way where Kaisa cannot, and then snowball that lead into something even a late game carry like Kaisa can't come back from. And next up we have Katarina for the mid lane. She's been jumping around and decimating entire teams through the usage of her quick daggers and dashes. Katarina's ultimate Death Lotus spins her in a circle while throwing out daggers at incredible speeds. By channeling this skill, she deals an incredibly absurd amount of damage to all nearby champions. She has been one of the highest skill camp champions on Wild Rift, rewarding mechanically advanced summoners for their quick wit. Thanks to her cooldown resets from acquiring kills, often through the usage of her ultimate, Katarina becomes an unstoppable force in teamfights. But what happens when an unstoppable force meets an unbreakable wall? Well, Galio is that wall. As a beefy frontline AP tank mid laner, he is the perfect counter to Katarina, creating a pretty much unplayable game situation for her. Justice Punch, Galio's third ability, shoots him forward, knocking up the first enemy champion he jumps into. In addition, Galio has 2 more crowd control abilities in his kit. Shield of Durand, his second ability, channels an area of effect taunt. This skill, when comboed with Justice Punch, allows Galio to lock down the enemy for quite a significant amount of time. Whereas Katarina excels when she's allowed to dash around, Galio excels at keeping the enemy in one place. This directly counters Katarina's playstyle, since Galio can simply run up to her and pin her down, CCing and then bursting her down before she's allowed to deal substantial damage. And if Katarina begins to channel her ultimate, Galio can either taunt or knock the assassin up to interrupt the ability, effectively nullifying Katarina's kit. If Katarina tries to even roam, Galio has the perfect solution to counter that roam through the usage of his ultimate, Hero's Entrance. This allows him to fly to the aid of his ally, spanning nearly the entire map and then knocking up all enemies nearby them. The area of effect circle from Galio's ultimate should be enough warding to force the Katarina off of his ally. But if she decides to remain within the range of the ultimate, she'll be met with 2 knockups and a taunt, preventing her from doing pretty much anything. Galio is literally the perfect counter to Katarina, since she relies on getting close to her enemies to deal damage to the daggers, which then places her in the very dangerous range of Galio's crowd control. He is truly Katarina's worst nightmare. Next up, we have Fiora in the Baron lane. The Grand Duelist has been performing exceptionally well on Wild Rift thanks to her versatile kit and gap closers. Her first ability, Lunge, pushes Fiora a small distance. The skill rewards aggressive play since the cooldown decreases when hitting an enemy unit. This allows her to continuously chase enemies while maximizing both her speed and her damage. In addition, Fiora's second ability, Riposte, counters all crowd control effects when properly timed. This skill is best when used against a CC effect that is more predictable in nature, allowing for easier outplays. An example of such would be like Galio's Justice Punch, where he winds up before going in to deal the knockup. But against champions that have little to no preparation before dealing their crowd control, Fiora players need to either have inhuman reaction speeds or just simply predict all the enemy moves, something most players are incapable of doing. Because of such, Pantheon is Fiora's natural counter, thanks to his second skill, Shield Vault. When utilizing this skill, Pantheon immediately jumps at his target, stunning them and dealing damage thereafter. So be sure to auto-attack once or twice after the stun to maximize the quick trade. Once the stun dissipates, Fiora will need to fully commit to a trade to even out the damage or simply back off. Keep this in mind when playing Pantheon and be sure to disengage if Fiora decides to run in. The Gladiator champion excels in trading in short bursts and poking with the usage of his first ability, Comet Spear. Doing so will allow him to kite Fiora while avoiding the bulk of her damage. Continue performing these quick trades to whittle down Fiora until you're comfortable enough to all in for the kill. Now that does cover how to play Pantheon against Fiora in lane, but that isn't necessarily the biggest advantage that Pantheon provides. The Pantheon versus Fiora matchup objective isn't necessarily to kill Fiora every time. Instead, Pantheon should offer utility in map runs and teamfights that Fiora just can't match. The Grand Duelist playstyle relies heavily on split pushing, hoping for 1v1 scenarios in side lanes. If her team doesn't fall behind while she does so, this is an effective strategy to gain an advantage. But Pantheon can easily ensure that the enemy team without Fiora does not do well. Utilize Pantheon's ultimate Grand Starfall to rotate towards essential portions of the map. Doing so will often result in outnumbering the enemy team. Follow up the roam with his point-and-click stun, locking down key targets for his allies to capitalize on. Now moving on to the jungle, Lee Sin is a great example of a jungle champion that has been continuously seeing a lot of play. He's been meta ever since Wild Rift's release, since his kit grants him a massive amount of mobility, allowing him to traverse the map however he pleases. The majority of his damage relies on getting up close to the enemy by using his first ability, Sonic Wave, and then Resonating Strike. After closing the gap, he deals burst damage capable of destroying squishy targets by utilizing Tempest and Dragon's Rage. As one of the most versatile junglers in Wild Rift, thinking of ways to counter Lee Sin can kinda be overwhelming. There's just so much in his kit to help him adjust to whatever circumstance that he finds himself in. So, how do you realistically counter that? Well, similar to the Fiora and Pantheon matchup, there are areas that a champion excels in, which leaves room for areas that they lack. Fiora split pushes, which means she's often not there for her team. For Lee Sin, he lacks the frontline capability that many junglers provide, since he's often a damage carry that relies on not getting hit. Yeah, his insane mobility makes him hard to catch, but at the same time, that means that he often won't be there to body block for the rest of his team. So, Dr. Mundo is an excellent jungle pick that is just simple as hell to play and provides the frontline capabilities that Lee Sin lacks. Thanks to the inclusion of Sunfire Aegis, Dr. Mundo scales very fast into the game, able to stack 2 ruby crystals very early on, granting him the necessary health to pull off his skills. Mundo's second ability, Brooding Agony, deals area of effect damage all around him, synergizing perfectly with Sunfire Aegis, while making engaging at him head-on quite dangerous. This early game tankiness makes it so that if Lee Sin jumps onto Mundo, he is essentially choosing a losing trade. Unless Mundo was already very low, Lee Sin will not be able to execute him, meaning the damage over time from simply being near Mundo will force Lee Sin to retreat. Mundo excels in extended fights thanks to his health regeneration, while Lee Sin plays best in very short skirmishes. As the game goes on, Mundo just gets stronger and stronger, making him an incredibly difficult frontliner to kill. He's very beefy, providing great cover and constant engage for his team, because he doesn't fear walking headfirst into the enemy. Lee Sin, on the other hand, doesn't scale that well into the late game and can often be seen jumping around for his own selfish needs rather than protecting his allies. This makes Dr. Mundo an easy pickup champion to exploit the Lee Sin pick in your games. Well, if you're like me and refuse to play meta picks by principle, then hopefully this video will help you win some more games. Be sure to hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and also join our Discord to get more involved with the ProGuides Wild Rift community. As always, best of luck on the Wild Rift, stay hydrated, and I'll see you next time.
Power, high energy, and